Okay, so we're going to be talking about chapter 19 today, and that is the second part of the cardiovascular system, and we're going to be focusing on the heart right now. The heart, I guess let's talk about what is the major function of the cardiovascular system first. The function of the cardiovascular system is to ensure that blood is circulating continuously throughout your body and to establish adequate perfusion. The word perfusion means delivery of sufficient blood or delivery of blood to a tissue so that the tissue is healthy. So adequate perfusion means that it's sufficient. It is keeping that tissue healthy. It is delivering enough nutrients and oxygen and materials to the tissue. And at the same time as the blood is leaving, it's removing all the waste so that they're not accumulating there. So adequate perfusion means that the tissue is adequately supplied with blood flow, okay? The cardiovascular system as a whole is composed of heart, which is the pump for the blood, then blood that is going to fill the blood vessels, and then blood vessels would be the third component, and blood vessels serve as pipes for the blood that flows through your body. Just a little general, description of blood vessels. Even though blood vessels are going to be a major topic of chapter 20, we need to introduce the main types of vessels here because we'll be talking about some arteries and veins here. So there are three major types of blood vessels. There are arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So remember, arteries away. Veins are going to carry blood towards the heart. And then capillaries are your smallest blood vessels, and these smallest blood vessels are a site of exchange. And when I say site of exchange, what I mean by that is that this is the place where nutrients are going to be diffusing out of the blood into the tissue, and the waste are going to be picked up by the blood. So capillaries are our smallest blood vessels. This is the only place where things move in and out of the blood, okay, between blood and tissues. All the larger vessels are too thick for any kind of passage happening, so we don't see any of that in the larger vessels. Okay, so again, arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins towards the heart, and capillaries site of exchange. Okay, so let's focus more on the heart, and I'm gonna put this picture up here right now. Heart is a double pump. Okay, I already said that it's a pump for the blood in our body, but it is more specifically, it is a double pump. It is composed of two atria and two ventricles. It's one atrium and two atria. Okay, so the plural of atrium is atria, so two atria and two ventricles. And these are the four chambers of the heart. When I use the word chamber, it just means a space, a compartment, all right? So I will have you do some labeling later on. And so when I say label the chambers of the heart, don't be telling me left chamber, right chamber, or something like that. You have to say, okay, this is the left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle. Okay, is what I mean when you're supposed to label chambers of the heart. Okay, so four chambers, two atria, two ventricles. The atria are the superior chambers, so they're on the top. So when we look at this, let me see if I can mark. I can't mark this up. What did I open this in? Oops. Did we just lose it? Yep, we lost it. I don't know why. But okay, you know what? Actually, I think I'm sharing it in the wrong app. Okay, hold on, give me a moment because I wanted to make sure that I can draw on this for you as I'm talking about this. All right. Oh, no. This is not working. It's Monday, right? Okay, let's do this. All right, with this, I know that I can draw on this. All right, okay, hopefully you can see this. Okay, so back to the chambers. Sorry about that technical detour there. The atria are these top chambers right here, and then the ventricles are these bottom chambers right here, okay? Uh, the, um, the atria and the ventricles are separated from each other by valves, and these are known as the AV valves or atrial ventricular valves, okay? And they have that name because they separate atria from ventricles, okay? So atrioventricular valve, and that's right here, okay? So that, and then right here, you can see that right here. So it's this white part, okay? See this and this. And based on what sides they are, okay, it is a little delayed, I apologize, but as you can see, you know, if it's on the right side, it would be the right AV valve. If it's on the left side, it would be the left AV valve. As you play around with visible body, you will see that we also call them bicuspid and tricuspid valves, or there are some other names there as well, but you'll get familiar with that as you practice with visible body, okay? So that's that. So let's talk about how the blood is going to flow through the heart, just kind of a basic pathway of the blood. And I will expect you to be able to label the blood flow through the heart. And I can basically guarantee you that there will be a question. This one will be kind of one of the longer ones that will make you label steps as the blood flows through, okay? Generally, when we describe blood flow through the heart, we start with the right atrium. Okay, so we would start right here. So the blood is coming into the right atrium. This is deoxygenated blood. It is returning to the heart from flowing through the body. So deoxygenated blood enters the right atrium. It enters from three places, three major places, okay? And so you kind of need to remember that. It is going to come in through, oops, why is it doing that? Through this vessel down here, that is the inferior vena cava. Then there is this vessel on the top here, that is the superior vena cava. And then there is this opening, and on this image right here, it is not labeled as anything, but this dot right there, that little spot, this is the opening of the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus is a vessel that collects deoxygenated blood from the heart's blood supply. And that will make a little more sense when we talk about coronary circulation. But basically, three places are bringing deoxygenated blood to the right atrium, okay? The blood that enters the right atrium then passes through this right AV valve into the right ventricle, okay, to the bottom right ventricle. Once the atria contract, they're going to squeeze all the blood into the ventricles, okay? And then after atria contracts, what happens is the ventricles contract. And when the ventricles contract, they're going to send the blood, okay, specifically for just looking at the right side, the right ventricle sends the blood into the pulmonary trunk, okay? So this is the pulmonary trunk, okay? Pulmonary trunk. I probably did not pick the best color, but it shows well on the blue and the red. But that's the pulmonary trunk. All right, so a right ventricle then sends the blood into the pulmonary trunk. That right AV valve that we're looking at on the right side between the right atrium and the right ventricle, this is the valve that prevents blood from going back into the atrium. Okay, so when the ventricle contracts, that right AV valve closes. It does not allow blood to go backwards. Okay, so the valves that we see in the heart are ensuring that the blood flows in one direction and it's not going backwards. Okay, so when the right ventricle contracts, it closes the right AV valve and it opens this other valve that we see here, which is a pulmonary semilunar valve. And that is this one right here. I hope this is a color that shows, okay. See the green that I'm using right there, okay. And it looks like two kind of U's or something like that. This is a semi-lunar valve because it is kind of like a half moon shaped valve. And there's actually three little cusps like this inside of that pulmonary trunk, okay? This is a valve that prevents blood flowing back into the ventricle after the ventricle stops contracting, okay? So imagine that ventricle contracting, it contracts, it pushes this valve that I drew in green, okay, that pulmonary semilunar valve open as the blood is pushed into that pulmonary trunk. And then the blood goes from the pulmonary trunk splits into left and right pulmonary arteries, okay? So these right here, oops, come on, draw. This and then this, where my arrows are right now, these are the pulmonary arteries. It's not showing us the color there, but actually, if you look on the middle picture, I have my chat window covering that right there. But if you look at that middle picture, there is the pulmonary trunk that is labeled for you. And they labeled pulmonary veins, surprisingly, but they didn't label pulmonary arteries. Those are the blue ones. And yes, you heard that right, okay? So the blue vessels, okay, I'm gonna draw the arrows to the pulmonary arteries on this side also. These are pulmonary arteries, they are blue. Now, you might have thought that this should be opposite, the red ones should be arteries, right? But actually in the pulmonary circulation, the colors are different. They're switched because the purpose of pulmonary circulation is to get our blood oxygenated. All right, so as the deoxygenated blood entered the heart, now we have to send it away from the heart to the lungs so it can get oxygenated. So these are your pulmonary arteries, they carry deoxygenated blood, okay? The deoxygenated blood is then going to enter the lungs, and it's going to flow through the lungs, through the capillaries eventually of the lungs that surround the alveoli of the lungs. And this is where the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange happens. So as the blood flows through the lungs, you're going to see oxygen is going to be entering the blood, carbon dioxide is going to exit the blood. More on this, like the driving force of this will be in the respiratory system chapter. Okay, so we'll see what drives this process later. For now, just know that in the lungs, oxygen goes into the blood, carbon dioxide goes out of the blood, all right? So then the blood becomes oxygenated after this oxygen carbon dioxide exchange. And the vessels that are going to collect this oxygenated blood are your veins. Okay, so small venules first, and then larger and larger veins. Ultimately, we end up with two on each side, two pulmonary veins on each side. And those are these right here. You have them labeled by the textbook here as well. Okay, so pulmonary veins, there are two from each lung that are going to bring oxygenated blood back to the heart. The chamber or the compartment that receives this oxygenated blood from the lungs is your left atrium. Okay, so atria are receiving blood from vessels. Okay, ventricles receive blood from the atria. So the left atrium receives blood from the left and right pulmonary veins, and then it fills the blood fills the left atrium, and then from the left atrium, it will pass through the left AV valve, left atrial ventricular valve, and it will pass into the left ventricle. Then when the left ventricle contracts, it kind of has a similar effect, really the same effect as we saw on the right side, that the AV valve is closed as the ventricle contracts, and the blood is pushed into, maybe I should use yellow here, into this opening right here, which is the aortic semilunar valve at the base of the aorta. So the aorta is kind of like behind the pulmonary trunk. You see pulmonary trunk as you're looking at this picture, it's kind of forward towards you, it's anterior. The atrial semilunar valve is behind it. Okay, so on this drawing, it looks like it's kind of hidden. It's really centrally located in the heart. Okay, so it goes through the through the aortic semilunar valve, And then the blood enters the aorta. Okay, this is kind of, you know, in the background, and then it goes into the aorta. The aorta has several parts here, so you should be able to tell me which is the ascending aorta, aortic arch, and descending aorta. So when you are looking at this, this part, this first part right here is the ascending aorta, okay? Where it arches right here, this turn, okay, you see that? That bend of the aorta, that's the aortic arch. And then once it turns down right here and then behind the heart, that's the descending aorta. So make sure that you are really paying attention to where that line is pointing. Here it's just pointing to aorta just in general, but if in your choices, multiple choices, if you see ascending or descending aorta, make sure that you're paying attention to what side that is on, okay? If you don't have those choices, then wherever it points, it would just be aorta, right? But if you have specific choices, then you have to answer it specifically, all right? So that's that. And then aorta brings the blood, the oxygenated blood to the rest, to your body. It ultimately will branch into systemic capillaries and tissues where the gas exchange is happening opposite. So carbon dioxide is picked up from the tissues, oxygen is being delivered to those tissues. And then you have deoxygenated blood, which ultimately will be collected by the vena cava, so superior, inferior vena cava. Or if we're talking about coronary circulation, it will be picked up by the coronary sinus. So that was a long description of the blood flow, but short description again, the right atrium receives blood from the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and coronary sinus. Blood flows, deoxygenated blood flows through the right AV valve into right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the blood will pass through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary trunk will branch into left and right pulmonary arteries, and these will carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And then in the lungs, oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange happens. Oxygen enters the blood, carbon dioxide leaves the blood, blood becomes oxygenated and then is delivered by pulmonary veins into the left atrium. From the left atrium, the blood will pass through the left AV valve into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, the blood will pass through the aortic semilunar valve into ascending aorta, aortic arch, descending aorta. And aorta brings the blood ultimately to systemic capillaries where oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange happens. Carbon dioxide is picked up, oxygen is delivered, and then the cycle repeats, okay? So that was complete description of the blood flow, all right? If you are having troubles with the blood flow, that is the part that you need to rewatch again, okay? That had all the structures that were necessary for the blood flow through the heart. Okay, we already talked about those AV valves. Now, if you look at your visible body, the modules, okay, notice that you're not getting grades for modules or the anatomy ID parts. There are only those quizzes that you're getting grades for on visible body. Those modules they're your guides for, you know, being successful on those quizzes. So you should be looking at those. There are videos for you, and various animations, and then practice with those structures there. So they're ungraded, but they are there for you to get ready for those quizzes. Okay, so you should be doing them before you're doing those quizzes. Practice with that anatomy ID, especially with the heart. Heart has a lot of stuff in it, and it can get tricky. So do your practice first before you attempt those quizzes, okay? Yeah, so that's that. Okay, let's, this figure right here shows you that general flow pattern of the blood through our body. Okay. Whoa, what happened? I don't know why why it's disconnecting me. Sorry. Oh, tell me you're not gonna quit on me. So anyway, waiting for my iPad to connect to my computer. It was just fine. Okay, I don't know what happened here. So, okay, now it says it's connected, so, oh, goodness. Of course, we would have technical difficulties, wouldn't we? Can't have a session that runs smoothly, right? All right, let's see. Let's see if I can do something else. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Sorry about that. Oh no. Well, that gives you a little break, I guess. All right, this should work. Okay, let me see. Okay, let's see if we can share this. Okay. Okay, now you should be seeing my Google Chrome thing. Okay, I hope that works. I don't know why the connection between my iPad and my computer quit, but hopefully this will work here. All right, so we talked about the blood flow through the heart and all that. This is a good, nice summary for you that shows you how the blood goes through our whole body. I want to talk about ventricular balance and the amount of blood that flows through the heart. When you actually look at the ventricles, on some views, it looks like that one ventricle might be bigger than the other, especially like if we were dissecting the heart, which we're not, unfortunately, but if we were doing that, one of the ventricles would look larger, but that's really just because of the wall of the ventricle itself. As far as how much blood the ventricles pump out, these volumes are the same. They need to be same. There are some cases where the volume of the blood pumped by each ventricle is not the same, and this usually is a result of some kind of a condition where one ventricle is weaker than the other, so it's unable to keep up with all the blood that's coming in. And so if this is the case, then edema could occur. And edema is accumulation of blood in your tissues. And depending on which ventricle is weaker, we can talk about systemic edema or pulmonary edema. So if your right ventricle cannot keep up with the left, then the blood is left in the systemic circulation. So imagine that, you know, there's blood that's coming into the right atrium, right? That right atrium is passing it into the right ventricle, but the right ventricle is unable to push all that blood out because it's weaker, it's impaired for some reason. Then that's going to cause a backup in the right atrium. It's going to cause a backup of blood in the vena cava, and it's ultimately going to cause a backup in the systemic capillaries, which increases pressure in those systemic capillaries, which increases fluid filtration. This will make a little more sense when we look at capillary exchange in the next chapter, when you see what actually happens, like how nutrients move in and out of the blood. Okay, but if that right ventricle is unable to squeeze everything out, then it basically causes a backup in the vessels before it. Okay, and so this can cause excess filtration in the systemic tissues, and you would observe it as swelling. Okay, that's systemic edema. Now, if the left side is impaired, so if you have left ventricle that is weaker, then the backup is happening in the vessels before it, which would be the capillaries in the lungs. Okay, so if the left ventricle is receiving blood from the lungs, but it's not able to push it all out, to send it all into the aorta because it's, for some reason, it's weaker, then it causes backup in the left atrium, which causes backup in those pulmonary veins, which causes backup in the lungs, in the vessels before it. This would cause pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema is where fluid accumulates in your lungs, so it's excessive filtration in your lungs, and that doesn't sound good, right? You don't want to have excess fluid in your lungs because then it would impair your breathing. So in a normal healthy heart, both ventricles are going to be pumping equal amounts, equal volumes of blood. Okay, and if they don't, then you have this edema occurring. Let's talk about, this is a nice integrated summary of everything that we have talked about so far. Most of what we have been talking about so far has been anatomy part. So this is a nice little summary of what you're supposed to be looking at. The heart, as far as the position of the heart goes, heart is located in an area of your body called mediastinum. So that's this area right here between the lungs, basically, in your thoracic cavity. And the heart is positioned with its apex pointing slightly anteriorly and kind of pointing down and anteriorly is how it's located. I wanted to look at, actually, I don't know why we are going into pericardium. I really wanted to look at some internal features here because we kind of already talked about those valves and such. So this figure right here is going to be a very important figure for you when you're labeling the heart. You should be able to label everything that is on this heart, okay? So it's a very good reference picture. Eventually, again, you need to be able to label all these when you're not looking at these labels, okay? You will need to be able to label these on a visible body as well on that picture, but it's heart is a heart is a heart. All the parts are, pretty much the same. So that's that. So make sure that you are familiar with the valves. Now, I talked about the valves already, but what I didn't talk about is some additional features that are associated with the valves, especially with the AV valves here. Okay, so what I want to make sure that we all understand is that this white part, okay, now this is a dissected heart, okay, so you are only seeing half of it, so you're only seeing part of that valve. This valve would go all the way around, but the valve, okay, specifically I circled the right AV valve, is just that white part, okay, that flat kind of looks like a membrane, okay, just that white part is the valve. Then we have these what look like little strings here, okay, you see these strings here? Those strings are attached to the valve, they're not a valve, okay? So if a line is pointing to a string, don't tell me it's a valve, it is not a valve. And on the quiz, I will see who watched this video because there's always someone that, labels the string as a valve. The string is chordae tendineae. So string are chordae tendineae, or here they're called tendinous cords, which is the same thing, okay? So tendinous cords or chordae tendineae are these strings basically that anchor the valve to these little, what look like little mountains here, or little hills, okay? See that? Okay, those are not a valve also, okay? These are papillary muscles. So the valve is anchored to the papillary muscles by chordae tendineae, all right? So valve is the white thing, the stringy things are tendinous cords or chordae tendineae, and then the little finger-like structures that are sticking out of the wall of the heart, these are your papillary muscles, all right? Notice that there are 3 on the right side, and on the left side, you have 2. So this is also the reason why we call the right AV valve tricuspid and left AV valve bicuspid. It has to do with number of papillary muscles that are in here. It seems like there could be like a 4th one here on the right, but that's not really a thing. Okay. So tricuspid and bicuspid is what we see here. We've already talked about the semilunar valves here. Okay, so these are at the base of the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, and they prevent backflow of the blood from the pulmonary trunk into the ventricle. Okay, they are like cup-like valves, and so when the blood pushes on this valve, like right here, pulmonary valve is the one that's well visible in this picture here. When the blood pushes on this valve from here, it is going to push this open kind of this way, okay? So the 2 cusps are not attached in the middle. They're just leaning against each other. And there actually are 3 of these. We're just seeing 2 because, again, you're not seeing 1/2 of the heart here. Okay, so it's 3 kind of pouches like this. They're not attached like permanently in the center. Okay, they're just resting against each other. Hopefully there's an animation in the visible body that will kind of show you what happens to these valves as the heart beats, okay, as the heart contracts. That's about it. On this, you have the opening of the coronary sinus labeled right here. There's one other thing that looks kind of like it could be an opening here, and that's this. Okay, that is fossa ovalis. Fossa ovalis, fossa means a depression. So fossa ovalis is an oval, basically like a dent or a depression in the wall of the heart. Fossa ovalis used to be foramen ovale during fetal development, because during fetal development, when a fetus is inside of the mother's body, we don't really need to use pulmonary circulation for oxygenating blood. The fetus is not using its lungs for air. The oxygen exchange happens through the mom. It happens through the placenta, and then mom does the exchange in her lungs. Okay, so the pulmonary circulation in a fetus is really not functional for its ultimate purpose. And so there is a hole during fetal development right here that, okay, again, it's a little slow, but right there, it would be an opening that allows blood, most of the blood, to go from the right atrium into the left atrium, kind of bypassing the pulmonary circulation, again, because the lungs are not doing the oxygen exchange. Upon birth, this foramen ovale closes and it just leaves behind the depression, which we now call fossa ovalis. So that's that right there. What else? On this view, we can see that there are some differences between left and right ventricles. And here you can kind of see that the right ventricle could look like it is bigger, but it really is not. It's just an optical illusion there. Because of how this kind of cut is made, okay? The left ventricle, notice the wall of the left ventricle, okay? So outside wall especially, okay? We see the outside wall of the left ventricle is about that thick, right? What about right ventricle? Look at the right ventricle here, okay? The right ventricle is way thinner than the left ventricle, right? And this has a reason. There's a reason why the left needs to be thicker. Now remember, volume is the same, so the amount of blood that is being pumped by each ventricle is the same, yet the left ventricle has a thicker wall. Okay, any ideas why that would be important? You can type it. Good. Okay. So we got an answer from Jessica, and Jessica says the left side needs to be stronger because the left side is sending the blood through the entire body, whereas the right side is just sending blood to the pulmonary circulation. It's just sending it to the lungs, and lungs are right next to the heart. So it doesn't need to be as strong of a contraction to achieve its purpose. Okay, so remember, left side is thicker, and it has to do with where the blood is being sent. Okay. Another thing that we see on this figure here is that heart is surrounded by a membrane, and it's this what I'm talking about right here. Okay. Again, it's a bit slow this way. Not sure why I got disconnected from that iPad sharing the other way, but all right. So that's the yellow line that I just made. That's part of the membrane that surrounds the heart, and this is called pericardium. The pericardium is a fibroserous sac that surrounds the heart. Okay. And as I said, fibroserous, this means that there is going to be a fibrous part and a serous part of the pericardium that surrounds the heart. The function of the pericardium overall is to hold the heart in place and also make sure that as it contracts and relaxes, this motion is nearly frictionless and you're not feeling the heart every time it beats, okay? So there are two parts. There's a fibrous pericardium and a serous pericardium. Fibrous pericardium is the outside part. It is relatively thick compared to the serous pericardium. Okay, so it's this outside part right here, and it's thick. Okay, and it's actually kind of tough too. Like if you were to touch it, it is not very stretchy. Okay, so that's your fibrous pericardium. It is, again, the outer part. It holds it anchors the heart to the great vessels, and then the bottom of the pericardium, like right here, it would be attached to the superior surface of the diaphragm. And so that's that. Oh, so the other part of the pericardium is the serous pericardium, and serous pericardium is actually a double layer. So let me get rid of this green stuff right here. And if you look kind of like right here, it is kind of showing you that. You can see really well, oops, I didn't draw it, but you can see well the pericardial cavity there, which is the space between the two layers of the serous pericardium. Hold on, I think maybe we have an actual pericardium here. Okay, so here, this figure right here is going to show it a little better, okay, where you can see that top and how the serous pericardium is folded. So serous pericardium is underneath the fibrous pericardium, and here you can actually see the fibers attached to the diaphragm there. Okay, so serous pericardium is a double layer underneath the fibrous pericardium, and it's kind of folded upon itself. So imagine having a balloon. Okay, if you had a balloon, and then you take the heart or whatever, your fist, and then you push your fist into that balloon. It will kind of squish that balloon into two layers, right? And so that's kind of how that serous pericardium is functioning. And I think they attempted to kind of draw it here. Okay, so here's your two layers. Layer one, oops, different color. Layer one here, and then the layer two is here, okay? So it creates like a double layer right there. The serous pericardium, because it is a double layer of pericardium, it has a parietal layer or parietal side, and then the visceral layer. Parietal layer is, if you look at this top, like the magnified part right there at the top, the parietal layer would be the one that's attached to the serous, to the fibrous pericardium. I'm sorry about that. Let me pick green. Okay. So, maybe that wasn't the best. Okay, so it's right here. That's the parietal layer. It is much, much thinner than the fibrous pericardium, as you can see. Okay, it's a very thin layer there. That's the parietal layer. Then we have the pericardial cavity, that's this space right here. Okay, I just put the squiggly purple line in there. Okay, that's the pericardial cavity. That's the space between the two layers of the serous pericardium. And then we have this layer right here. As it appears, maybe. Okay, so that's my orange line. That's the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, okay? So the yellow-green line, as I tried to draw over the green with my yellow, that's your parietal layer, okay? The squiggly purple line, that's the pericardial cavity. And then the orange line is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Both of these layers of pericardium, the serous pericardium, are going to release serous fluid, and the serous fluid is going to ensure that the heart, as it contracts, it's not rubbing against the other structures in your thoracic cavity, okay? And so that's that. Now, I wanna, okay, let me see how I could actually show you something, but actually, I am not gonna do it in this section. I will actually record another separate video, hopefully much shorter, that is going to be talking about the lab manual exercise that you will need to be turning in. It's going to be kind of like the endocrine exercise, but this one is going to have more drawing, okay? So more drawing and less actual typing in there, so you can draw your drawings on a separate sheet of paper. But I'll go over that exercise and explain each part that you need to do in a video that I will attach to that assignment, like I did last time for the endocrine, okay? So I don't have that video yet. I will upload it there probably after we get out of this section right here, okay? But the reason why I'm mentioning it here is because I'm asking you to draw the layer of heart wall and the pericardium in one place. So sometimes some people kind of get confused about that. All right. So that's pericardium, and we had the heart wall here. So when I was talking about this and the internal features of the heart, this has a section of the heart wall, which you can see here at the bottom. All right, this is just the layers of the wall of the heart itself. It excludes the pericardium, so you would need to be drawing some extra stuff. Again, watch that video that is going to be attached to the assignment on the on Blackboard. But yeah, so these are the three main parts, three main layers of the heart wall itself. The innermost layer of the heart wall would be endocardium, and endocardium is composed of a simple squamous epithelium. This is going to be called endothelium. This endothelium is going to be continuous with the great vessels, pulmonary trunk and the aorta. The thickest part of the heart wall is the myocardium. Myocardium is the cardiac muscle. And then we have the epicardium, or also known as our visceral layer of the serous pericardium. And that's this part that looks kind of like yellowish, okay? It is actually the same as your endocardium, but epicardium, or that serous layer of the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, it has some adipose tissue in there. So it's a little thicker, and it kind of has a yellowish tint to it. All right. So that's the layers of the heart wall. And all right, what do we have next? So the last part that I'm going to talk about today actually is the surface features of the heart. Some of these I'm going to ask you to label on the drawing of your heart. Some of these I'm not, like any vessels of the coronary circulation, I'm not going to ask you to draw those into your drawing. But the other stuff, yes. So I want to point out these features sometimes that kind of escapes our attention here. These things that kind of look like flaps here on the superior part of the heart, which, by the way, this whole part of the heart is called the base, okay? And then the pointy part is called the apex, okay? But those flaps, oops, what am I doing? Those flaps are known as auricles. Okay, so there's left and right auricle. Auricles are extensions of atria. It's just some extra space if more blood is coming into the atrium, but they're just kind of external parts of the atria. And then there are some other features that we need to talk about, and these are called sulci. And when we talk about sulci, this is also when I talk about the coronary circulation. So you might want to have this picture in front of you, as well as this image right here. This one that's about to show up for you, this one is later in the chapter, and it shows you the coronary circulation, including the veins. I'm not sure why where we talk about sulci, the veins are not included, but I will talk about them even though they're not labeled on these images here. So you might want to be looking at this, and I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm gonna talk about my heart that I have right here. Okay, so all right. So there are some grooves that are found on the surface of the heart, and this is the model of the heart that I have right here. Whoopsie. This heart, I will have a presentation. It's not a presentation where I'm actually talking about it, but we do have a bunch of pictures of this heart. It's just such an excellent heart, and so you will need to look at that and be able to point out things on this model as well. But I'm going to use this right now so that I can talk to you about these grooves and the coronary circulation of the heart that we see here. Okay. So there are three main grooves. So you can see some blood vessels that are on the heart, right? You can see some blood vessels right here, right here. If you were to grab one of these vessels and you pull it off, you pull it away from the heart wall, you would see that there's a groove that is left behind underneath that vessel. Okay, so we call these grooves sulci. It's one sulcus, two or more sulci. Okay, and there are three main ones that we will need to mention. The first one is going to be coronary sulcus, and so as you're holding this heart in front of yourself, or I'm holding it in front of you, the coronary sulcus is the one that goes around the heart this way. Okay, so it goes along the circumference of that heart. Okay, so it goes like this. All right, all the way around this way. All right, that's your coronary sulcus. Coronary sulcus is going to house the left and right coronary artery. Okay, and we can see on this model, I'm gonna open up this auricle right here so we can see that vessel a little better. Okay, but you can see the right coronary artery here. Okay, it is a direct extension of the aorta. This is your aorta, right? Okay, it's a direct extension of the aorta, and then it will run along that coronary sulcus. Okay, the left coronary artery is not very much visible because it actually is behind the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so you see this aorta right here. See the right one, the left one is behind the pulmonary trunk, and we only see a little bit of it right here, and then it splits right here in the front right away. So the left coronary artery is not very large. Okay, and so that's kind of that. So coronary sulcus is going to house the left and right coronary artery. It also will house your circumflex artery. Okay, so that's not, I mean, it is right here, but that's one of the branches that we get into. Okay, where did you disappear? There you go. Okay, so coronary sulcus, left and right coronary artery. And on the left side, it also is going to house the circumflex artery. Okay, so if you didn't write that down, write that down somewhere. Coronary sulcus houses left and right coronary arteries, and then a circumflex artery. For the vein is shown better or best on the back side, on the posterior side. And you see this kind of a fat vessel, okay? This is your coronary sinus. Coronary sinus is going to take the deoxygenated blood from all this coronary circulation. So all these vessels that you see on the surface of the heart, that's called coronary circulation. Coronary sinus is going to collect the deoxygenated blood from the coronary circulation, and it will bring it where? We already know that it brings this deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, okay? So the vessels you find in the coronary sulcus are the left and right coronary arteries, circumflex artery, and coronary sinus for our vein, okay? So that's coronary sulcus. There are two other sulci that we need to talk about, and they are the anterior interventricular sulcus. That's this groove right here on the front side of the heart. So you can see that there are a couple of main big vessels running this way. And then on the posterior side, we also have a posterior interventricular sulcus, okay? So anterior interventricular sulcus, this front one, is the groove on that anterior side. It runs along the interventricular septum, all right? So think about the name, anterior interventricular sulcus. Anterior means it's on the anterior side. Interventricular, it runs between the ventricles. If you actually open this, okay, you can see that this is the divider between the left and right ventricle. So that groove runs along that interventricular septum. Septum is like a wall. Septum is like a divider, okay? So it runs on the surface of that interventricular septum. And yeah, so that's where that name comes from, okay? It's anterior interventricular septum, sulcus, okay? Anterior because of the side, interventricular because it's between the ventricles, and sulcus because it's a groove, okay? This anterior interventricular sulcus is going to carry in the anterior interventricular artery. So the artery that we see here it has the same name as the sulcus. Okay, that's for most of your arteries. Like for coronary, we had left and right coronary arteries. It was coronary sulcus. For the artery here in the anterior interventricular sulcus, the artery is anterior interventricular artery, okay? This artery is going to be kind of accompanied by your great cardiac vein. So this vein right here that you see along with it, that's the great cardiac vein. It is not, if you're looking at your figure in your textbook, which is describing the sulci, it doesn't have the vein labeled on it for some reason, but it is labeled in the coronary circulation where you just see the vessels for you. But this is the great cardiac vein. The anterior interventricular artery is also known as the widowmaker because what it does is this artery right here brings blood to the anterior surfaces of the ventricles as well as the interventricular septum. So it's very important. It brings oxygen and nutrients to most of your ventricles, okay? And so if that artery gets occluded, there's not really sufficient pathways around that could fix that. And if that artery gets occluded, it most commonly leads to fatal heart attacks, okay? So it's also termed as a widowmaker, okay? This one is very important. Anterior interventricular artery branched out from the left coronary artery, yeah? The left coronary artery, for that reason, if you look at this, or even if you look at your picture in your textbook, you see that the left coronary artery branched into that anterior interventricular artery, and then the other one is that circumflex artery, right? So that's how the left coronary artery branches, right? So anterior interventricular artery is a branch of the left coronary artery here. And the other one is that circumflex, okay? Now, if we look at the posterior side, and the posterior is kind of a little harder to see, but it's right here, okay? So this is the posterior side. We see the posterior interventricular sulcus. Okay, posterior interventricular sulcus, again, artery is going to be easy for you to remember. It is the posterior interventricular artery, okay? That's what we see there. The vein that runs along it is your middle cardiac vein. Okay, so that's the middle cardiac vein. The posterior interventricular artery supplies the posterior surface of the ventricles, and it is a branch of the right coronary artery along with the marginal artery, okay, which is a little farther right here, okay. So the left and right coronary arteries do look quite different from each other. The left is, again, short, and most of it is hidden behind the pulmonary trunk. The right coronary artery is quite long, and it has a branch right here, kind of on the side. That's that right marginal artery. And then the other branch of the right coronary artery is that posterior interventricular artery. Those are the two main branches of the right coronary artery, okay? So that's our coronary circulation that you need to be aware of. I'm not having you label this anywhere, but visible body, I believe, does have some coronary circulation labeling or identification for you. So make sure that you're practicing with those assignments there. Okay. Since I have this heart already in my hands, just so you can see what the heart would look like from the inside. Here, this is the right atrium. Notice that you would have the superior vena cava here, and then as you turn this, you would have the inferior vena cava here, and then next to it, there's like a little dot, and that's the opening of that coronary sinus, okay? This white area, that's that fossa ovalis that used to be an opening, but it's not an opening anymore, okay? So that's your right atrium. Then we have the right ventricle underneath it. This white part, that's that valve. Notice it's going all the way around here, okay? The little white strings, chordae tendineae, and then they're attached to papillary muscles here, all right? This is your pulmonary semilunar valve right here. So the blood would go this way. They didn't attach the third part of the valve, but there would be a third little white thing right there because the semilunar valves have three little pouches, three little cusps there. And then this is the pulmonary trunk. Notice how anterior pulmonary trunk is. It's really close to the surface of the heart. So that pulmonary semilunar valve is really near the surface of the heart. To find the aortic semilunar valve, we have to look at the left side. Okay, we have the left atrium right here. This is the left AV valve. Chordae tendineae are the white strings. This little red thing is supposed to represent the papillary muscle. And then to find our aortic semilunar valve, you have to look kind of on the inside this way. See, and this one is intact. It has three pouches right there that you can see. And so as the blood is pushing against this, everywhere where you see those lines, that's where the pouches just lean against each other, but they're not attached there. So you can push this open as the blood is pushed through there, okay? So the aortic semilunar valve is quite central to the heart. It's right there, kind of in the middle of that heart. So those are, and then you would have the vessels here, okay? Remember, our pulmonary veins are these red ones. This is a pulmonary artery, this blue one, right? Because pulmonary circulation is opposite. So, so that's that for the heart. We talked about the pericardium and the layers of the heart wall already. And so this is generally where I'm going to stop. I uploaded already for you a couple of recordings that are going to finish chapter 19. These two recordings are about 30 minutes each. And one of them talks about the myocardium, compares the myocardium to the skeletal muscle, and so on. Then the other one is going to be talking mostly about the cardiac cycle and what happens, what are events of the cardiac cycle, what affects various things and such. So it's more of a physiology that you will have on those videos. And again, they're already posted. There are YouTube links, and that really proved to be the best way for me to upload them for you, because I've been getting some errors if I just try to upload the whole video as a file. So I have to upload it to YouTube first, and then I'll just share the link with you on Blackboard. Also, what I wanted to point out is that on the Blackboard in chapter or in unit 2, you have 2 chapters, chapter 19, chapter 20. Make sure that you're checking those, and then check the calendar. I will be, I think, adding maybe a couple more things for chapter 20 today, and then everything should be completed. You do have a quiz on pulmonary circulation due tomorrow. Okay, so you might want to start looking at that, and you know, use the anatomy ID to practice. Okay, don't go into the quiz on a visible body before you actually do some practice. Okay, play around with it. Look at those modules. This is just repeating the information that's already in the textbook. That you might have already read. It's just reinforcing that information for you. So run through those modules. The more things that you look at, the better you will do. All right. So that concludes this first part of chapter 19. Again, the second part of chapter 19 is already posted in the recordings of unit 2. Okay, so that's where you go, and I will add the recording of this after it is processed. Okay.